Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, 8,848 meters above sea level. A place where the sky turns black at noon, where the air holds 1/3 the oxygen you breathe right now, where the temperature can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius, and the winds can hit 130 kilometers per hour. A place where dreams are made, and where hundreds of people have died chasing them. Every year, climbers from around the world spend months preparing. They spend tens of thousands of dollars. They train for years. They leave behind families, careers, entire lives, all for one goal, to stand at the top. But what most people don't realize is this. Everest is not just a mountain. It's a graveyard, a frozen, open-air graveyard, with over 200 bodies still on the slopes. Bodies that have been there for years, some for decades, frozen, preserved, unmoved, because bringing them down is too dangerous, too expensive, too close to impossible. And the scariest part? Every single climber heading to the summit has to walk past them, stepping over legs, squeezing past frozen hands reaching out of snowbanks, using bodies as navigation markers. Because up there, death doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like Hollywood. It looks quiet, slow, like someone just sitting down to rest. Today, we're going through some of the worst, most haunting deaths in Everest history. The stories that stayed with the people who witnessed them. The stories that sparked global outrage, ethical debates, and questions that have never been fully answered. Not to glorify these deaths, but to understand what really happens when humans push beyond every limit the body has, in a place that was never designed for survival. 1. Green Boots, the most famous body on Everest. There is a cave on the northeast ridge of Mount Everest, at 8,500 meters above sea level, deep inside what climbers call the death zone. And inside that cave, there's a body that became a landmark. For nearly 2 decades, almost every climber heading to the summit from the north side had to pass this cave, had to step over the legs that jutted out of the entrance. And they gave the body a name, Green Boots, because of the neon green Koflak mountaineering boots still on his feet. Bright, unmistakable, perfectly preserved by the cold. Green Boots is widely believed to be Sewang Palger, a 28-year-old head constable from Sakti, a village in Ladakh, India. He was part of an Indo-Tibetan border police expedition attempting to become the first Indians to summit Everest from the northeastern Tibetan side. A harder, less traveled route. On May 10, 1996, one of the deadliest days in Everest history, Palger and 2 teammates, Dorje Morup and Sewang Samanla, pushed for the summit. At 3:45 in the afternoon, they radioed their expedition leader. They had reached the top, or so they believed. Evidence suggests they may have been 430 feet short, visibility nearly zero. It didn't matter. The storm that was already building had other plans. Winds beyond 130 kilometers an hour. Temperatures plunging below minus 40 degrees. The 3 men were separated in the whiteout. None of them ever returned to camp. Palger is believed to have crawled into that limestone cave. Shelter from the howling wind. A place to wait out the storm. But the storm didn't stop, and his oxygen ran out, and his body temperature dropped, and he died sitting in that cave. His body was preserved so perfectly by the cold and altitude that for nearly 20 years, climbers described him as looking like he was resting, like he just sat down for a moment. The cave at 8,500 meters became known simply as Green Boots Cave. Some climbers stopped to take oxygen there. Others photographed him. Some whispered a word of respect as they stepped over his legs. A few admitted they barely registered him anymore. Because when you've been above 8,000 meters for hours, your brain barely functions. You don't feel grief up there. You barely feel anything. In 2014, Chinese mountaineers, likely from the China-Tibet Mountaineering Association, which manages the north side of Everest, reportedly moved or covered Palger's body. By 2017, climbers confirmed the cave was still there. The body still present, but now respectfully covered with rocks and snow. No longer the glaring landmark it once was. 2. David Sharp, the man who was left to die. In 2006, something happened on Everest that shocked the entire world. Not because someone died. People die on Everest every season. But because of how he died, and who walked past while it happened. David Sharp was a 34-year-old British mountaineer, a mathematics teacher, an engineer by training, a man who had climbed Cho Oyu, the world's 6th highest peak, and had already attempted Everest twice before. He was determined. Some said too determined. On May 14, 2006, he began his push for the summit. Alone. No Sherpa guide. Less supplemental oxygen than recommended. No support team. Just him and the mountain. Sometime around 1 a.m. on May 15th, a group of climbers spotted him on the way up. He was sitting in a cave. Green Boots Cave, to be exact. The same limestone alcove where Tsewang Palger had died 10 years earlier. Sharp wasn't wearing his oxygen mask. His eyelashes were covered in frost. He wasn't moving. One passing climber reportedly said, "The poor guy's stuffed," and kept going. A second group spotted him 20 minutes later. This time he reacted. He waved them off. His last recorded words, "I just want to sleep." Over the course of that day, more than 40 climbers passed David Sharp. Some stopped briefly. Some spoke to him. Some assumed he was already dead. But he wasn't. He was alive. Barely. His arms and legs were severely frozen. He could not stand, even with assistance. Several men dragged him briefly out of the cave into the sunlight. But an immobile climber at 8,500 meters cannot be rescued. It is physically, medically, almost impossibly difficult to carry a dead weight down the most dangerous mountain on Earth. So one by one, they left him. Climber Maxime Chaya found him and sat with him, prayed with him. Then Chaya had to leave too, or risk his own life. David Sharp died alone in that cave, in the same spot where Green Boots had died a decade earlier. And when word reached the outside world, the reaction was immediate. Outrage. Even Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, publicly condemned the climbers who passed Sharp without attempting a real rescue. He called it a horrifying example of summit fever overriding basic human decency. Defenders of those climbers argued that a rescue was genuinely impossible. That going to help Sharp would have killed rescuers too. That high-altitude decisions can't be judged from sea level. The debate has never been fully resolved. And maybe that's the point. Because the question David Sharp's death forced the world to ask is one that has no clean answer. At what altitude does ambition become indifference? At what point does the drive to reach the top cost someone their basic humanity? 5. Hannelore Schmatz, the woman with her eyes open. One of the strangest, most disturbing things about death on Everest is how it can look. There are bodies on that mountain that don't look dead. They look like they sat down for a break. They look like they're thinking. And none embody that more than Hannelore Schmatz. Hannelore Schmatz was a German mountaineer, an experienced, accomplished climber who had scaled some of the world's most demanding peaks with her husband, Gerhard Schmatz, an expedition leader. On October 2nd, 1979, she became the fourth woman in history to summit Mount Everest. She had done it, but during the descent, the exhaustion caught up with her. She and fellow climber Ray Jennett, an American mountaineering legend from Alaska, were too depleted to keep moving. Despite urgent warnings from their Sherpa guides, they stopped. They bivouacked at 8,500 meters in the death zone as the temperature dropped and the wind rose. That night, Ray Jennett died of hypothermia. His body was eventually swallowed by snow and ice, gone forever. Hannelore survived the night. She and her Sherpa guide, Sung Dare, began the descent. But at 8,300 meters, just a short distance from the safety of Camp 4, Hannelore sat down. She leaned back against her rucksack. Her last words, whispered to Sung Dare, "Water, water," and then she was gone. She died where she sat, and the mountain preserved her in that exact position. For years, for decades, her body froze in that seated posture, leaning against her pack, eyes open, hair moving in each gust of wind, looking for all the world like a woman who had just paused on a walk. Norwegian mountaineer Arne Næss later wrote about passing her. Approximately 100 meters above camp, for she sits leaning against her pack, as if taking a short break. A woman with her eyes wide open and her hair waving in each gust of wind. He said it felt like she was following him with her eyes as he passed. 2 rescuers, Nepalese police inspector Yogendra Bahadur Thapa and his guide Ong Dorji, died in 1984 attempting to recover her body. Hannelore Schmatz stayed on the mountain until the high-altitude winds finally dislodged her remains, blowing her body over the edge. She was the first woman to die on Everest. She was the first of many. 6. Frances Arsentive, Sleeping Beauty. This is the most haunting story on Everest, and it starts with a triumph. On May 22nd, 1998, Frances Arsentive, a 40-year-old American climber, stepped onto the summit of Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, making her the first American woman in history to summit Everest oxygen-free. She had achieved something almost no one had done, but she had spent far too long in the death zone. far too long without the supplemental oxygen that keeps the body functional at extreme altitude. The descent began, and somewhere in the darkness, she and her husband Sergei Arsenteev became separated. Alone, at 8,600 meters, without oxygen, in the dark. The next morning, an Uzbek climbing team found her. She was half-conscious, suffering from extreme altitude sickness, frostbite, and hypothermia. They tried to help her, gave her oxygen, tried to carry her down, but they were running out of oxygen themselves. They were at their limit. They had to leave her. On their way down, they encountered Sergei, her husband, on his way back up, going back for her. It was the last time anyone saw Sergei Arsenteev alive. His body was found the following year, lower on the mountain. He had fallen, apparently while trying to reach his wife. He died going back for her.